I was sitting on my back porch in Phoenix, Arizona, drinking my morning coffee when I saw her marching across the street like a woman on a warpath. Her name was Linda, and she was the president of our homeowners association. At 52 years old, she had that signature haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," and an expression that suggested she had been personally offended by my very existence. I knew this was going to be bad. My name is Keith Patterson, and I had just purchased my first rental property 3 months ago. The house was a beautiful 3-bedroom ranch-style home with a desert landscape front yard, and I had been incredibly proud of finally breaking into the real estate investment game. I was 34 years old, working as an electrician during the day and managing this property on the side. My tenant, a quiet guy named Marcus who worked at the local hospital, had just moved in 2 weeks prior. Everything had been going smoothly until this moment. Linda stopped at the edge of my driveway, her hands planted firmly on her hips. "Keith Patterson, we need to talk," she announced loudly enough that I was certain my neighbors could hear every word. I set down my coffee mug and walked to the edge of the porch. "Good morning, Linda. What can I do for you? You know exactly what this is about," she said, her voice dripping with accusation. "Your rental situation. You are violating HOA regulations, and I am here to inform you that you need to cease and desist immediately." I felt my stomach drop. I had reviewed the HOA documents thoroughly before purchasing the property. There was nothing in there that prohibited rentals. "Linda, I went through all the covenants and restrictions. There is no clause that prevents homeowners from renting their properties." She pulled out a thick folder from under her arm, waving it at me like it was evidence in a court case. Section 12. Subsection 4 clearly states that all modifications to property usage must be approved by the HOA board. You never submitted an application for rental approval. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. That section refers to physical modifications like adding structures or changing exterior paint colors. It has nothing to do with who lives in the house. Linda's face turned red. "I am the HOA president and I have been doing this for 8 years. I think I know how to interpret our own regulations better than you do. You have 48 hours to remove your tenant, or I will be forced to take legal action." "Linda, you cannot just kick out a legal tenant. I have a signed lease agreement and Marcus has every right to be there." She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "Then you will be hearing from our attorney, and you will be fined $1,500 for non-compliance, effective immediately." Before I could respond, she turned on her heel and marched back across the street to her own house. I stood there, stunned and angry. This was ridiculous. I had done everything by the book. I grabbed my phone and immediately called my real estate attorney, Daniel Rodriguez, who had helped me with the purchase. "Keith, slow down," Daniel said after I had rambled through the entire confrontation. "Did you actually read the entire HOA document?" "Yes, cover to cover, twice. And there is nothing prohibiting rentals, nothing. I specifically looked for that because I knew it could be an issue." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Okay, here is what we are going to do. I am going to review your HOA documents myself. In the meantime, do not sign anything, do not pay any fines, and do not remove your tenant. If she wants to play hardball, we will play hardball." I felt slightly better after hanging up, but the anxiety lingered. I had invested almost every penny of my savings into this property. The mortgage, the renovations, the landscaping, all of it had stretched me thin financially. I could not afford a legal battle, and I definitely could not afford to have the house sitting empty without rental income. The next morning, I received a certified letter in the mail. It was from the HOA, formally notifying me of the fine and demanding that I appear at an emergency board meeting scheduled for the following Thursday evening. The letter was 3 pages long, filled with legal jargon and threatening language. I photographed every page and sent them to Daniel. His response came within an hour. "This is harassment. They have no legal basis for any of this. I will be attending that meeting with you." Thursday evening arrived faster than I wanted. I drove to the community center where the HOA meetings were held, my palms sweating on the steering wheel. Daniel met me in the parking lot, carrying his briefcase and wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Remember," he said as we walked toward the building, "stay calm, do not lose your temper, and let me do most of the talking." The meeting room was set up like a courtroom, with a long table at the front where Linda and 4 other board members sat. About 20 other homeowners filled the folding chairs arranged in rows. I recognized most of them from around the neighborhood. Some gave me sympathetic looks. Others seemed curious about the drama that was about to unfold. Linda banged a gavel on the table, calling the meeting to order. "We have one item on tonight's agenda: the violation committed by Keith Patterson regarding unauthorized rental of his property at 4287 Desert Rose Drive." Daniel stood up. "For the record, I am Daniel Rodriguez, legal counsel for Mr. Patterson. Before we proceed, I would like to state that my client has committed no violation of any kind." Linda's expression soured. "You brought a lawyer. This is a community meeting, not a legal proceeding." "And yet you sent my client a legal threat," Daniel replied smoothly. "So here we are." One of the other board members, an older man named George, leaned forward. "Mr. Patterson, we are simply trying to maintain the quality and standards of our neighborhood. Rentals bring in transient residents who do not have the same investment in the community." "My tenant is a registered nurse who works 12-hour shifts at St. Joseph's Hospital," I said, unable to keep quiet. "He is quiet, respectful, and keeps the property immaculate. What exactly is the problem?" Linda slapped her hand on the table. "The problem is that you did not ask permission. The problem is that you think you can just do whatever you want without consulting the board. We have rules here." Daniel opened his briefcase and pulled out a document. "I have reviewed the HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions 3 times. There is not a single clause that prohibits or restricts rental properties. Furthermore, Arizona state law protects a homeowner's right to rent their property unless there is explicit, clear language in the HOA document stating otherwise. Section 12, subsection 4, Linda said triumphantly, refers exclusively to physical alterations," Daniel countered. "I have case law here from Arizona courts that confirms this interpretation. Would you like me to cite them?" The room went silent. Linda looked at the other board members, clearly expecting support, but they all seemed to be studying their papers intently. "Fine," Linda finally said. "Then we will amend the HOA documents to prohibit rentals." Daniel smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "That requires a vote of the entire membership, not just the board. And according to your own bylaws, you need a 75% approval rate for any amendments to the CC and Articus. Good luck with that." A woman in the audience raised her hand. "I rent out my house too." "Are you going to come after all of us?" Another voice chimed in. "My son lives in my property while he is going to college. Does that count as a rental?" Linda was losing control of the room. "This meeting is about Keith Patterson's property. We can discuss other matters at a later date." "Actually," Daniel said, "if you are going to enforce rules, you need to enforce them equally across all homeowners. Selective enforcement is illegal and opens the HOA up to discrimination lawsuits." Linda's face had gone from red to purple. "I am calling the police. This is harassment." Please do, Daniel said calmly. I would love to have an officer here to witness this attempted intimidation. Linda grabbed her phone and stepped into the hallway. The rest of the board members sat uncomfortably at their table while the audience buzzed with conversation. George finally cleared his throat. Maybe we should table this discussion until we can get proper legal counsel for the HOA. That sounds reasonable, Daniel agreed. Linda returned a few minutes later. The police are on their way. Keith Patterson, you are about to face the consequences of your actions. I looked at Daniel, who just shrugged. Let them come. We waited for about 15 minutes, the meeting in a strange limbo. Finally, 2 police officers entered the room. I recognized one of them, Officer Mike Thompson, from a neighborhood watch meeting I had attended last year. Someone called about a disturbance, Officer Thompson asked, looking around at the quiet room. Linda jumped up. Yes, officer. This man, she pointed at me, is running an illegal rental operation and his lawyer is here threatening us. Officer Thompson turned to me. Keith, right? You are renting out your house. Yes, sir. I have a legal tenant with a signed lease agreement. Can I see your documentation? I pulled out my phone and showed him photos of the lease, Marcus's identification, and the property deed showing my ownership. Officer Thompson studied them for a moment, then looked at Linda. Madam, what exactly is illegal about this? The HOA prohibits rentals, Linda insisted. Do you have documentation of that? Officer Thompson asked. Linda fumbled with her papers, pulling out the HOA documents. Officer Thompson took them and flipped through several pages. His partner, a younger officer named Rodriguez, who I did not know, leaned over to read along with him. After a few minutes, Officer Thompson handed the documents back to Linda. Madam, I do not see anything in here that prohibits rentals. This looks like a civil dispute at best, and honestly, it does not even seem like that. This man has every legal right to rent his property. But Section 12, Linda started, talks about physical modifications, Officer Thompson interrupted. Madam, you cannot call the police because you disagree with someone's legal use of their own property. That is not what we are here for. Linda looked like she had been slapped. So you are just going to let him violate our community standards? Officer Rodriguez spoke up for the first time. Madam, if he is not breaking any laws and he is not breaking any legitimate HOA rules, then yes, that is exactly what we are going to do. In fact, making false police reports is itself a crime. I suggest you be very careful about calling us out here again unless there is an actual emergency or crime in progress. The room erupted in whispers and murmurs. Linda stood there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. George and the other board members looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. Officer Thompson turned to me. Keith, everything looks legal on your end. Just make sure your tenant knows about parking regulations and noise ordinances, standard stuff. Absolutely, officer. Thank you. As the officers left, Daniel stood up. I think we are done here, unless the board has any other baseless accusations to make. Linda sat down heavily in her chair. This is not over, she muttered. Actually, Daniel said, it is. And if you continue to harass my client, we will file a lawsuit against you personally and against the HOA for harassment, attempted intimidation, and defamation. Have a good evening. We walked out of the community center, and I felt like I could finally breathe again. Thank you, I said to Daniel. I could not have done that without you. That is what you pay me for, he said with a grin. But Keith, I need to warn you, people like Linda do not give up easily. She is going to look for any excuse to come after you. Make sure everything about your rental is absolutely by the book. Permits, inspections, everything. It already is, I assured him. I am not giving her any ammunition. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I received a call from Marcus at 7 in the morning. "Keith, there are people on the property taking pictures." I was at a job site, up on a ladder running electrical wire through a commercial building. "What do you mean, taking pictures?" "There is a woman and a guy with a camera. They are walking around the yard, taking photos of everything." I went out to ask what they were doing, and the woman said it was HOA business. "Linda," I said through gritted teeth. "Okay, do not confront them. Just let them do whatever they are doing. I will handle it." I called Daniel immediately. "They are building a case," he said. "Looking for any violation they can find. How is your property? Everything up to code?" "Everything passed inspection before I closed on it. The yard is maintained. The house is in perfect condition." "What about your tenant? Any issues with him?" "Marcus is a model tenant. He pays rent on time, keeps the place clean, barely makes a sound." "Good. Let them waste their time. But start documenting everything. Every interaction, every letter, every time they come onto your property. We might need it." 3 days later, I received another certified letter. This time it was a notice of violation for 12 separate infractions. They claimed my trash cans were visible from the street. My house numbers were the wrong size. There was a weed growing in the rock garden. The mailbox had a dent in it, and 8 other similarly ridiculous items. Each violation came with a $200 fine. I drove to the property immediately to check. The trash cans were in the side yard, barely visible unless you were specifically looking for them. The house numbers were the same ones that had been there when I bought the place. The weed was actually an ornamental desert plant that was part of the original landscaping. The mailbox had a tiny ding that I had never even noticed. I took photographs of everything and sent them to Daniel. His response was immediate. "They are reaching. File a written response disputing each fine. I will draft something for you." That evening, I was back on my porch when I saw Linda standing on the sidewalk in front of my rental property. She was not alone. There were 2 other women with her, all of them holding clipboards and taking notes. I grabbed my phone and started recording video as I walked over. "Linda, what are you doing?" She looked up, startled. "Conducting an HOA inspection. It is my right as president." "You need to give 24 hours notice before entering someone's property," I said. "And you are not entering the property. You are just harassing my tenant." "I am standing on public sidewalk," she shot back. "I can stand wherever I want." One of the other women, who I recognized as Linda's friend Barbara from down the street, pointed at my roof. "Your rain gutters have debris in them. That is a violation." "No, it is not," I said, keeping my voice level. "There is nothing in the HOA documents about rain gutters, and it rained 2 days ago, so of course there might be leaves up there." Linda made a note on her clipboard. "Your tenant has unauthorized guests. There was a car parked in the driveway yesterday that was not registered with the HOA." "You do not register cars with the HOA," I said, feeling my temper rising. "That is not a thing." "It is now," Linda said smugly. "We updated the rules." "You cannot update rules without a full membership vote," I reminded her. "My lawyer made that very clear." Linda stepped closer, her face twisted with anger. "You think you are so smart bringing your lawyer to meetings, recording me. Let me tell you something, Keith. I have been protecting this neighborhood for 8 years. I have kept out the riffraff, the troublemakers, the people who would turn this place into a slum. And I am not going to let some wannabe real estate mogul ruin what we have built here." "I am not ruining anything," I said. "I own a home here just like you. My tenant is a healthcare worker who serves this community. What is your actual problem, renters?" Linda spat the word like it was poison. "They do not care about the neighborhood. They do not come to meetings. They do not follow rules. They trash the place and move on. I have seen it happen in other communities, and I will not let it happen here." "That is discrimination," I said. "You are discriminating against renters." "It is called maintaining standards," Barbara chimed in. I looked at the three of them, these middle-aged women who had apparently decided that they were the guardians of suburban perfection. "I am done with this conversation. Stay off my property, stop harassing my tenant, and if you want to communicate with me, do it through official HOA channels or through my attorney." I turned and walked back to my house, my heart pounding. I could hear them muttering behind me, but I did not look back. The harassment continued. Over the next month, I received weekly violation notices. They complained that my tenant's car was parked at a slight angle. They said the exterior light bulb was the wrong color temperature. They claimed to have seen trash blowing into the yard from my property, though I had video evidence of the neighborhood teenagers being responsible. Every single complaint was frivolous, and every single one came with a fine. Daniel was earning his retainer. He responded to each notice with detailed legal rebuttals, pointing out the lack of basis for the violations and threatening legal action if the harassment continued. But Linda was undeterred. Then things escalated. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was at my own house working on some paperwork when Marcus called me, his voice panicked. "Keith, the police are here. They are saying there is a complaint about suspicious activity." I felt my blood pressure spike. "I am on my way. Do not say anything. Just tell them you are a legal tenant and give them my number." I broke every speed limit getting to the rental property. There were 2 patrol cars in the driveway, and I saw Marcus standing on the front porch talking to an officer. I parked on the street and jogged over. "I am the property owner," I announced. "What is going on?" The officer, whose name tag read Patterson, no relation, turned to me. "We received a call about suspicious activity at this address. Someone reported seeing multiple people coming and going at odd hours and suspected possible drug activity." "That is ridiculous," I said. "This is my legal rental property. This is my tenant, Marcus Williams. He is a nurse at St. Joseph's Hospital. He works night shifts, which is why people might see activity at odd hours." Officer Patterson looked at Marcus. "Can I see some identification?" Marcus handed over his driver's license and his hospital ID badge. The officer examined them carefully, then radioed something to his dispatch. After a moment, he handed them back. "Everything checks out. Mr. Williams has no record, and his employer confirms he works at the hospital." He turned to me. "Do you know who might have made this call?" "I have a pretty good idea," I said. "The HOA president has been harassing me for months because I am renting this property. She has made false complaints, trumped up violations, and now apparently she is calling in fake criminal reports." Officer Patterson frowned. "That is a serious accusation." "I have documentation," I said. "Months' worth of letters, emails, violation notices. My attorney has everything." The second officer, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "This address does ring a bell. Dispatch mentioned something about the HOA when the call came in." Officer Patterson pulled out a notepad. "What is the HOA president's name, Linda?" "I do not know her last name. She lives at," I pointed across the street, "that house right there. The one with the red door." "Wait here," Officer Patterson said. He and his partner walked across the street and knocked on Linda's door. I watched as she answered, and even from this distance, I could see her animated hand gestures. The conversation lasted about 5 minutes before the officers returned. "Miss Linda Morrison admits she made the call," Officer Patterson said. "She claims she was concerned about the neighborhood safety." "Did she have any actual evidence of drug activity or anything illegal?" I asked. "No. She said it was a hunch based on the unusual hours and unfamiliar vehicles. That is because he is a nurse who works nights, I said, feeling my frustration boil over. She knows that. This is a false report made out of spite. Officer Patterson looked uncomfortable. We are going to file a report on this incident. If there are more false reports, there could be consequences. But for now, we have determined there is no criminal activity here. He turned to Marcus. Sorry for the inconvenience, Mr. Williams. Have a good day. After the police left, Marcus looked at me with worry in his eyes. Keith, this is getting out of hand. I do not want to be caught in the middle of this. I know, and I am sorry, I said. This is not your fault. Linda is trying to make both of our lives miserable. What are you going to do? I am going to end this, one way or another. I called Daniel from my car. When I told him about the police being called, he was silent for a long moment. Keith, this has crossed a line. Filing false police reports is a crime. We need to take action. What kind of action? We are going to file a lawsuit. Against Linda Morrison personally and against the HOA for allowing this harassment to continue. We will ask for damages, legal fees, and a restraining order to keep her away from your property. How much is this going to cost me? Less than you think. We have a strong case, and I think we can get the court to order the HOA to pay your legal fees. Plus, we might be able to get some compensation for the stress and financial impact this has caused you. Let us do it. Daniel filed the lawsuit 2 days later. The next week was oddly quiet. No violation notices, no surprise inspections, no police calls. I started to think maybe Linda had finally gotten the message. Then I came home from work one Friday evening to find my own mailbox stuffed with flyers. Not normal junk mail, but photocopied pages with my rental property address and the headline "Crime Concerns in Our Neighborhood." The flyer claimed that rental properties were bringing down property values and increasing crime rates, and it urged homeowners to contact the HOA board to demand action. There was no signature, but I knew exactly who was behind it. I collected every flyer I could find. They had been put in mailboxes up and down the entire street. I documented everything with photos and timestamps, then sent it all to Daniel. His response was swift. He filed an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order and requested an expedited hearing. The judge granted both. The hearing was scheduled for the following Wednesday. I took the day off work and met Daniel at the courthouse in downtown Phoenix. I had never been inside a courtroom before, and despite having right on my side, I was nervous. Linda showed up with her own attorney, a tired-looking man in a rumpled suit who kept glancing at his watch like he had somewhere better to be. The HOA board members were noticeably absent. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Judge Martinez, reviewed the documents that Daniel had submitted. The pile was substantial. Every violation notice, every letter, copies of the police reports, witness statements from Marcus and several neighbors, and the defamatory flyers. Miss Morrison, Judge Martinez said, looking over her glasses at Linda. Can you explain to me why you have been engaging in what appears to be a sustained campaign of harassment against Mr. Patterson? Linda's attorney started to speak, but Linda interrupted him. Your Honor, I am simply trying to protect my neighborhood. Rental properties bring problems. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows that, Judge Martinez repeated. Do you have any evidence that Mr. Patterson's rental property has caused any problems whatsoever? Well, there was the suspicious activity, which turned out to be a nurse going to work, the judge interrupted. Anything else? Linda floundered. The property violations, which Mr. Patterson has disputed and which appear to be either non-existent or applied selectively. Miss Morrison, have you issued similar violations to other homeowners in your HOA? Some, yes. How many? Linda's attorney whispered something to her. I do not have exact numbers. Daniel stood up. Your Honor, we have obtained HOA records through discovery. In the past year, Miss Morrison has issued 73 violation notices. 68 of them were to Mr. Patterson for his rental property. The other 5 were scattered among the other 140 homes in the community. Judge Martinez's eyebrows rose. That seems rather disproportionate. It is harassment, Your Honor, Daniel said, pure and simple. My client has complied with all HOA regulations, all city codes, and all state laws. Despite this, Miss Morrison has made his life a living hell, culminating in false police reports that could have resulted in serious consequences for an innocent man. Linda's attorney finally managed to get a word in. Your Honor, my client may have been overzealous, but her intentions were good. She was trying to maintain community standards. By filing false police reports, Judge Martinez did not sound impressed. By distributing defamatory flyers. By selective enforcement of rules that may not even be legitimate. Counselor, I suggest you advise your client more carefully. The hearing lasted another hour, with both sides presenting arguments, but I could tell from Judge Martinez's expression that the outcome was not in doubt. Finally, she made her ruling. I am granting the temporary restraining order. Miss Morrison, you are to have no contact with Mr. Patterson or his tenant. You are not to approach his rental property. You are not to issue any further violation notices unless they are reviewed and approved by an independent third party. You are not to distribute any materials that reference Mr. Patterson or his property. Do you understand? Linda looked like she wanted to argue, but her attorney put a hand on her arm. Yes, Your Honor, he said for her. Furthermore, Judge Martinez continued, I am ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Patterson's legal fees to date, which according to the documentation provided amount to $8,300. And Miss Morrison, you should be aware that I am sending a copy of this order to the Phoenix Police Department with a recommendation that they investigate whether criminal charges are appropriate for the false police reports. Linda went pale. Her attorney started scribbling notes frantically. This hearing is adjourned. Judge Martinez banged her gavel. Walking out of that courtroom felt like emerging from a dark tunnel into sunlight. Daniel clapped me on the shoulder. That went better than I expected. What happens now? We wait and see if Linda violates the order. If she does, she could face contempt charges, which means possible jail time. But honestly, I think she got the message. I wanted to believe that, but part of me remained skeptical. The next few weeks were blissfully quiet. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Linda had resigned as HOA president. George had taken over temporarily, and he had sent out a letter to all homeowners apologizing for the recent misunderstandings and promising a more professional approach going forward. Marcus told me that he felt much more comfortable now, and he had actually started to make friends with some of the neighbors. Several people had approached him to apologize for Linda's behavior and welcome him to the community. I was starting to think everything was finally settled when I received a call from Daniel. Keith, we have a development. The Phoenix police have filed charges against Linda Morrison. My heart skipped a beat. What kind of charges? Filing a false report with law enforcement, which is a Class 1 misdemeanor in Arizona, and harassment, which is another misdemeanor. The prosecutor is taking it seriously because of the documented pattern of behavior. What does that mean for me? It means you might be called to testify. But more importantly, it sends a message. What she did was not just a civil matter, it was criminal. The trial was set for 3 months later. In the meantime, life started to return to normal. I focused on my electrical work. managed my rental property without incident, and even started looking at potentially buying a second investment property. Marcus turned out to be everything I could have hoped for in a tenant. He kept the place spotless, was always on time with rent, and even helped me out with some minor repairs since he was handy with tools. The HOA, under George's leadership, became almost invisible. They sent out occasional newsletters about community events and reminders about bulk trash pickup days, but gone were the aggressive enforcement tactics and constant violation notices. Then came the trial date. I took another day off work and headed downtown to the courthouse. This time it was a different courtroom, and the atmosphere was more serious. Linda sat at the defendant's table with her attorney, looking significantly older and more haggard than she had at the restraining order hearing. The prosecutor, a sharp-looking woman named Jennifer Hawkins, laid out the case methodically. She called Officer Thompson to testify about the night Linda had called the police to the board meeting. She called Officer Patterson to describe the false report about drug activity. She entered into evidence the stack of frivolous violation notices, the defamatory flyers, and emails Linda had sent to other board members discussing strategies to get rid of me and my tenant. When I was called to testify, I simply told the truth. I described buying the property, reviewing the HOA documents carefully, ensuring everything was legal and proper. I talked about the constant harassment, the stress it had caused, and the impact on my tenant who had done nothing wrong. Linda's attorney tried to paint her as a concerned citizen who was just trying to protect her neighborhood, but it rang hollow against the mountain of evidence showing a targeted, personal vendetta. The trial lasted 2 days. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning with a verdict, guilty on both counts. Judge Anderson, who had presided over the trial, looked at Linda with something that might have been pity. "Miss Morrison, your actions went far beyond the bounds of reasonable HOA management. You used your position of authority to wage a personal campaign against someone who was acting completely within their legal rights. You wasted police resources with false reports. You defamed Mr. Patterson and his tenant. You created a hostile environment in what should have been a peaceful community." Linda stared at her hands, saying nothing. "However," Judge Anderson continued, "I do take into account that you have no prior criminal record and that you apparently believed, however incorrectly, that you were acting in the community's interest. Therefore, I am sentencing you to 1 year of probation, 200 hours of community service, and a fine of $5,000. You are also permanently barred from serving on any HOA board or in any similar position of community governance." It was not jail time, but it was significant. Linda would have a criminal record. She would never be able to lord her authority over the neighborhood again. It felt like justice. After the trial, I stood outside the courthouse with Daniel. "It is really over," I said, more to myself than to him. "It is really over," Daniel confirmed. "You fought the HOA Karen and won. I could not have done it without you." "Sure you could have. You had the law on your side. I just helped make sure everyone else understood that." He paused. "What are you going to do now? Go home, check on my rental property, maybe have a beer?" "Sounds perfect." I drove back to Phoenix feeling lighter than I had in months. When I pulled up to my rental property to do a routine check, I saw Marcus in the front yard working on the landscaping. He waved when he saw me. "Hey Keith, did you hear about the trial?" "Yeah, I was there." "No, I mean about the neighborhood. George sent out an email. They are officially updating the HOA bylaws to explicitly allow rentals. He said they took a vote and 83% of homeowners approved it." I felt a smile spread across my face. "That is fantastic." "There is more," Marcus said. They are also creating an oversight committee to review any future violation notices before they can be issued, and they are requiring cultural sensitivity training for all board members. Sounds like George is taking this seriously. He apologized to me personally, Marcus said. Came by yesterday and said he was ashamed of how I had been treated. He invited me to the next community barbecue. We stood there in the warm Arizona evening, looking at the house that had caused so much trouble but had ultimately brought about real change in the neighborhood. You know, I said, when I bought this place, I just wanted to make some extra income and build wealth. I never expected to have to fight for basic property rights. But you did fight, Marcus said, and not just for yourself, you fought for me too, and for everyone else who might want to rent in the future. That means something. He was right. It did mean something. Over the following months, I watched as the neighborhood transformed. The hostile, suspicious atmosphere that Linda had cultivated gradually gave way to something more welcoming. More homeowners started renting out properties, some to young professionals like Marcus, others to families, retirees, and students. The community became more diverse, more vibrant. George turned out to be an excellent HOA president. He focused on legitimate community concerns like organizing neighborhood cleanup days, negotiating better rates for common area landscaping, and planning social events that actually brought people together. Linda and her husband moved away about 6 months after the trial. I heard they relocated to a retirement community in Scottsdale. Part of me felt bad for how things had ended for her, but mostly I just felt relieved. Some people could not accept change, and Linda had been one of them. Her rigid view of how a neighborhood should be had nearly destroyed mine. But in the end, the community had rejected her vision in favor of something better. I eventually did buy that second investment property, in a different HOA but armed with much more knowledge about what to look for and what red flags to avoid. I also became active in local real estate investor groups, sharing my story to help other landlords understand their rights and how to protect themselves from HOA overreach. Marcus lived in my rental property for 3 years before getting married and buying his own house, coincidentally just 2 streets over in the same neighborhood. We remained friends, occasionally meeting up for coffee or to watch football games. He joked that I had given him his first real experience of Arizona hospitality, though I reminded him that Linda's hostility definitely was not typical of the state. The legal fees from the HOA, combined with a small settlement I eventually received from the organization's insurance company for the harassment, more than covered all my attorney costs and compensated me for the stress and lost time. Daniel and I stayed in touch, and he referred me to other investors who needed legal guidance on HOA issues. Looking back on the whole ordeal, I realized that it had taught me valuable lessons about standing up for yourself, knowing your rights, and not being intimidated by people who abuse small amounts of power. Linda had tried to use her position as HOA president to bully me into submission, but she had underestimated my determination and my willingness to fight back through proper legal channels. The restraining order remained in effect for 2 years, though it became moot once Linda moved away. I never saw her again after the trial, and honestly, that was fine with me. Some conflicts do not need reconciliation or closure. Sometimes people just need to go their separate ways. The Phoenix real estate market continued to boom, and my rental property appreciated significantly in value. But more important than the financial success was the knowledge that I had stood my ground, protected my tenant, and helped create positive change in my community. The HOA was now a functional organization that actually served homeowners rather than harassing them. I learned that not all HOAs were bad. In fact, when run properly, they could be beneficial. The problem arose when people like Linda got into positions of authority and used them to push personal agendas rather than serve the community's actual needs. The key was accountability, transparency, and members who were willing to speak up when things went wrong. Several years after everything happened, I was at a neighborhood gathering when George approached me with a beer in hand. "Keith, I never properly thanked you for what you did." "What do you mean? I was just protecting my property." "No," George shook his head. "You exposed serious problems in how our HOA was being run. Linda had gotten away with similar behavior for years, but nobody wanted to stand up to her. She had created this culture of fear where everyone was worried about getting targeted. You broke that." "I had a good lawyer," I said modestly. "You had courage," George corrected. "And because of that, this is a better place to live." We have had 4 new families move into rental properties in the past year, and they have all been great neighbors. We have more diversity, more energy, more life in this community. That would not have happened if you had backed down." His words meant more to me than any financial settlement could have. I had not set out to be a neighborhood hero or a champion of renters' rights. I had just been a guy trying to make an investment and build a better future for myself. But sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for something bigger. The whole experience also changed how I approached my electrical business. I became more careful about contracts, more diligent about documentation, and more willing to seek legal counsel when situations seemed problematic. Those lessons served me well in multiple areas of life. I also gained an appreciation for good police officers like Officer Thompson and Officer Patterson, who had looked at the actual facts rather than just taking Linda's word at face value. They had conducted themselves professionally and had recognized harassment when they saw it. When Officer Thompson had warned Linda about making false reports, he had given her a chance to stop before facing criminal consequences. She had chosen not to take that chance, and that was on her. The legal system, for all its flaws, had worked. Judge Martinez had seen through Linda's justifications and had protected my rights. The jury had held her accountable for her actions. Judge Anderson had imposed consequences that were proportional and fair. It restored some of my faith in the system. Daniel had been worth every penny I paid him, and I recommended him to dozens of other property owners and investors over the years. Good legal representation was not cheap, but it was invaluable when you were in the right and facing someone determined to make your life miserable. As for Marcus, he became something of a local advocate for tenant rights. His experience of being targeted by Linda, of having the police called on him simply for living his life and doing his job, had given him a perspective that he used to help others. He eventually joined the board of a nonprofit that provided legal assistance to renters facing discrimination and harassment. The neighborhood barbecue that George had invited Marcus to became an annual tradition, growing larger each year. It was no longer just a few board-approved homeowners standing around awkwardly. It was a real community event with music, games for kids, and genuine friendships forming. Homeowners and renters mingled freely, the artificial division that Linda had tried to maintain completely dissolved. I often thought about what would have happened if I had given in to Linda's initial demands. If I had kicked Marcus out, broken the lease, left the property empty, or sold it at a loss. I would have been financially hurt, Marcus would have been displaced, and Linda would have continued her reign of terror unchecked. By standing firm, by knowing my rights and being willing to fight for them, I had prevented all of that. The story spread beyond our neighborhood. Local real estate investment groups used it as a case study in their meetings. A few local news stations picked it up after the trial, running segments about HOA overreach and homeowner rights. I even got interviewed for an article in a real estate magazine about dealing with difficult HOAs. Some people reached out to share their own HOA horror stories, and I always gave them the same advice. Document everything, know your rights, get a good attorney, and do not be afraid to stand up for yourself. Most HOA bullies back down when confronted with someone who actually understood the law and was willing to fight back. I never did become an HOA board member myself. I had no interest in the politics or the drama. But I did make a point to stay informed about what was happening, to attend meetings when important issues were being discussed, and to vote on proposed bylaw changes. Being an engaged community member did not require seeking power or authority. It just required paying attention and speaking up when necessary. The rental property continued to be a solid investment. After Marcus moved out, I found another excellent tenant, then another. Word had spread that I was a fair and responsive landlord, so I never had trouble finding qualified renters. The property had appreciated enough that my equity position was strong, and the rental income covered the mortgage with room for profit and maintenance reserves. I eventually expanded my real estate portfolio to 6 properties across the Phoenix metro area. Each time I evaluated a potential purchase, I scrutinized the HOA documents even more carefully than I looked at the property itself. I knew what red flags to watch for: vague language that could be interpreted broadly, high concentration of power in the board, history of litigation, and most importantly, any restrictions or limitations on rentals. Some HOAs I simply walked away from, no matter how attractive the property. If the governing documents prohibited rentals or gave the board excessive discretionary power, I knew it was not worth the risk. There were plenty of other opportunities that did not come with built-in adversaries. I also learned to build good relationships with HOA boards from the start. I introduced myself, provided my contact information, explained that I was a local owner-operator who took pride in my properties, and made it clear that I was responsive to legitimate concerns. Most boards appreciated having engaged owners, even if those owners rented out their properties. The few times I did encounter HOA issues at other properties, I was prepared. I knew exactly how to respond, what documentation to keep, and when to involve legal counsel. Word apparently spread among HOA management companies too, because I noticed that boards tended to be more reasonable when dealing with my properties. Nobody wanted to be the next Linda Morrison, facing criminal charges and public humiliation for HOA overreach. Looking at my original rental property on Desert Rose Drive, now nearly 5 years after the whole ordeal began, I felt a sense of pride, not just in the financial success, but in what it represented. That house was a symbol of standing up to bullies, of knowing your rights, of the importance of good legal counsel, and of how one person's courage could change an entire community for the better. Linda had tried to use fear and intimidation to control the neighborhood according to her narrow vision. Instead, she had catalyzed a transformation that made the community more inclusive, more diverse, and more welcoming. The outcome was the opposite of what she intended, and there was a certain poetic justice in that. I never forgot the feeling of standing in that community center meeting room while Linda threatened me, or the anxiety of watching police cars pull up to my rental property. Those memories kept me grounded and reminded me why it had been important to fight back. But they also faded over time, replaced by better memories of neighborhood barbecues, good tenants, and a community that had chosen inclusion over exclusion. The legal precedent from my case was cited in several other Arizona cases involving HOA disputes. Daniel told me that judges were using Judge Martinez's restraining order ruling as an example of how to handle similar situations. The criminal case against Linda had made HOA board members across the state think twice before engaging in harassment or filing false reports. In the end, what started as a nightmare scenario of HOA harassment had turned into a victory that resonated far beyond my single rental property. It had changed my neighborhood, influenced legal precedents, helped other homeowners and renters, and taught me lessons that made me better at business and at life. George eventually stepped down as HOA president after serving 2 successful terms. The woman who replaced him, a retired school principal named Janet, continued his inclusive approach. The neighborhood thrived under stable, reasonable leadership that focused on legitimate community needs rather than petty power trips. I saw Linda only once more, years after the trial. I was at a restaurant in Scottsdale with some friends when I noticed her sitting at a table across the room. She looked older, quieter, diminished somehow. Our eyes met for a moment, and I saw something in her expression: regret, maybe, or just weariness. I gave her a small nod, acknowledging her presence without hostility. She looked away quickly. I did not feel anger or vindictiveness. I just felt glad that chapter of my life was over. As I sat on my porch that evening, watching the sun set over the Arizona desert, I reflected on the journey from that first confrontation to where I was now. My rental property was thriving. My tenant was happy. My neighborhood was peaceful. Linda was gone, legally barred from ever wielding HOA power again. Justice had been served, not just in court but in the real-world outcome. The story of the HOA Karen who called the cops on my rental property, only to have the officer confirm everything was legal, had become part of neighborhood lore. New residents heard about it, usually with some embellishment about how dramatic the confrontations had been. I usually downplayed my role, but the story persisted because it represented something important to people. The idea that you could stand up to bullies in positions of authority and win. Marcus stopped by occasionally, sometimes with his wife, and we would laugh about those early days when Linda was photographing his gutters and tracking his work schedule. Time and distance had given us perspective to see the absurdity of her behavior. But we also never forgot how stressful and frightening it had been at the time, especially for Marcus, who had simply been trying to live his life and do his job. The Phoenix real estate market continued to evolve, with more and more people recognizing that rental properties were a normal, healthy part of any community. The stigma that people like Linda had tried to attach to renters gradually faded as neighborhoods became more diverse and accepting. My rental properties were full of people who were every bit as invested in their communities as homeowners. They just chose a different form of housing. I learned that home ownership and community involvement were not synonymous. Some of the most engaged, caring neighbors I knew were renters. And some homeowners never contributed anything positive to the community. Linda herself had owned her home outright, but her contribution to the neighborhood had been overwhelmingly negative. Marcus had been a renter, but he had brought kindness, professionalism, and positive energy to the community. The whole experience taught me to judge people as individuals rather than making assumptions based on their housing status. It taught me the importance of fair, transparent rules applied equally to everyone. It taught me that standing up for what is right sometimes requires courage and persistence, but the outcome is worth the fight. As my real estate business grew, I made it a point to mentor new investors, especially those facing HOA challenges. I shared my story freely, along with the lessons I had learned. I connected them with Daniel and other good real estate attorneys. I helped them understand their rights and how to protect themselves. Several people told me that my experience had inspired them to stand up to unreasonable HOA demands in their own situations. Some won their battles, some reached compromises, and a few decided it was not worth the fight and sold their properties. But they all made informed choices rather than being bullied into submission, and that was what mattered. The Phoenix real estate investment community knew my story, and I became something of an unofficial resource on HOA issues. I did not mind. If my experience could help others avoid similar problems or give them the courage to fight back against harassment, then all the stress and expense had served a larger purpose. Life moved on, as it always does. The rental property on Desert Rose Drive remained a solid part of my portfolio. The neighborhood continued to thrive under reasonable HOA leadership. Linda Morrison became a cautionary tale rather than a present threat. And I continued to build my business, armed with hard-won knowledge and the confidence that comes from standing up for yourself and winning. When people ask me for advice about dealing with difficult HOAs, I always emphasize the same points. Know your rights, document everything, get good legal counsel, and do not be afraid to fight back when you are in the right. But I also emphasize that not all HOAs were bad, and that most conflicts could be resolved through communication and reasonable compromise. Linda had been an extreme case, and extreme cases required extreme responses. The restraining order had long since expired, rendered moot by Linda's move to another community. The criminal probation had been completed. The fines had been paid. The legal chapter was closed. But the impact of those events continued to ripple outward, affecting how HOAs operated, how homeowners understood their rights, and how communities thought about the relationship between owners and renters. I never regretted buying that rental property, despite all the headaches Linda had caused. It had turned out to be one of my best investments, both financially and in terms of personal growth. It had tested me, taught me, and ultimately made me stronger and more knowledgeable. Those lessons had value far beyond the rental income or property appreciation. As I looked toward the future, I saw more opportunities for growth and success. But I also saw them with clear eyes, knowing that challenges would arise and that I had the tools and experience to handle them. Linda had tried to be my worst nightmare, but instead she had been an unwitting teacher, showing me what I was capable of when pushed to defend what was right. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and purple. Another beautiful Arizona evening in a neighborhood that had transformed from a place of conflict into a genuine community. My rental property stood solid and well-maintained, housing a tenant who was living peacefully and contributing positively to the neighborhood. The HOA operated fairly and transparently under leadership that actually served the community. It was, in every way, a happy ending. Not the kind where everything was perfect, but the kind where justice had been served, lessons had been learned, and life had moved forward in a better direction. Linda had called the cops on my rental property, confident that she would be vindicated and I would be punished. Instead, the officer had confirmed everything was legal, setting in motion a chain of events that ultimately held her accountable for her harassment and transformed the neighborhood for the better. That was the real victory, not just winning my individual battle, but creating positive change that helped others and improved the community as a whole. As I finished my beer and headed inside for the evening, I felt grateful for the journey, challenges and all. It had made me who I was, and I was proud of that person.